Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
All right, excellent. Well, today we're looking at large language models, LLMs.
Oh, yeah.
But we're kind of shifting gears a little bit. We're not just talking about them as like your AI coding assistants or anything. We're
Right.
thinking about them as like core parts of software products.
Yeah, more fundamental, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so our jumping off point for this is an opinion piece. Let me see if I can remember the name of it. Ah, yes, here it is. It's called Why LLMs Within Software Development May Be a Dead End.
Ooh, that's a bold statement.
It is, right. And the author, yeah, they lay out a pretty skeptical view. So what we're going to do today is kind of unpack that.
See if they're onto something.
Yeah, see if you're onto something or if they're missing a piece of the puzzle, of how these LLMs are actually being used.
I think it's a good time to have this conversation, too. There's so much hype around LLMs,
Oh, yeah,
but are we really thinking critically about what they are and what they're not?
exactly. So the author starts off with this analogy that I thought was really interesting. They compare LLMs to cars.
Okay.
And they're saying, you get this whole package, right? You get in, you drive, but you're not supposed to tinker under the hood.
I like that. It really captures that feeling of, this powerful technology that we can use but not fully understand.
Yeah, and it kind of makes you think, well, how much do we really need to understand? I mean, I don't know how an engine works, but I can still drive a car.
Right. But that's where the author starts to get concerned.
Okay.
They argue that this lack of transparency, this black box problem, as they call it, makes it tough to integrate LLMs reliably into bigger systems.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly,
Right.
they're saying because we don't fully understand how they work,
Right, exactly.
we can't really be sure how they'll behave when we use them as part of, like, a larger software product.
That's the gist of it. And they contrast this with traditional software development where, everything is broken down into modular, understandable pieces.
Ah, I see. So like with traditional software, you can test each part, see how it works, and fix it if it breaks.
Yeah, you have that control and visibility.
But with LLMs, it's more like
Mm,
you just got to trust that it'll do what you want it to do.
to a certain extent, yeah. And that's where the skepticism comes in.
Okay, I'm starting to see their point.
Mm.
But I mean, let's be real. Are there many software components that we use daily and we completely understand how they work on the inside? I mean, I don't think so.
That's true, We often rely on complex systems without knowing every detail.
Right, exactly. So is this really that different?
Well, the author would argue that it is, and a big part of that comes down to the data LLMs are trained on.
Oh, yeah, the data dependence issue.
Yeah.
I think we need to explain that a bit for our listener, though. What exactly is training data when it comes to LLMs?
Okay, so imagine you're teaching a child to speak. You expose them to lots of language, books, conversations, songs, all that.
Right, immersion.
Exactly. That's basically what training data is for an LLM. It's a massive amount of text and code that it's fed to learn patterns and relationships in language.
So it's like the LLM's education.
You could say that, and just like with a child, that education shapes its worldview in a way, how it understands and uses language.
Okay, so the author's worried that because of this reliance on training data, LLMs might inherit biases or quirks that we don't even realize are there.
That's one of the concerns, and they point out that this can lead to all sorts of problems, from security risks, like the LLM leaking sensitive information from its training data,
Oh, okay.
to, reinforcing societal biases in its outputs.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's a whole other can of worms, right?
It is, and it's something we need to be very mindful of as we develop and deploy these systems.
For sure. But I'm curious, do you think the author is being overly cautious here? I mean, can't we address this data dependence issue through careful curation of the training data?
That's definitely an active area of research. People are working on making training data sets more representative and developing ways to detect and mitigate biases.
So it's not like we're just throwing any old data at these things and hoping for the best.
Not exactly, but the author's point is that these efforts are still in their early stages. We don't yet have a foolproof method for ensuring that LLMs are free from harmful biases.
Okay, I see. So there's still a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely. And that's why this conversation is so important. We need to be aware of the potential pitfalls and be actively working to address them.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you on that. But, there's part of me that keeps wondering, are we maybe focusing on the wrong problems here?
What do you mean?
Well, what if the issue isn't the LLMs themselves, but how we're trying to use them?
That's interesting. The author does touch on this a bit.
Right. They give this example of Zoom's CEO wanting to use AI clones to attend meetings. And it just seems like such a bizarre use case.
Yeah, it definitely highlights this tendency to jump on the AI bandwagon without fully thinking through the implications or the value.
Exactly. Like, why would we even want AI clones in our meetings? It feels like a solution in search of a problem.
Right. And maybe that's where we need to shift our focus. Instead of trying to make LLMs do everything, maybe we should be asking, what are they truly good at? And how can we leverage those strengths to solve meaningful problems?
I like that. So instead of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole,
Exactly.
we should be looking for problems that are actually well suited to the unique capabilities of LLMs.
Right. So instead of focusing on how to make LLMs fit into existing software paradigms, maybe we should be asking how they can help us reimagine what software can be.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So we've talked about the author's skepticism about LLMs as software components, but I think there's another side to this story.
There is, and that's what we're going to delve into next.
Excellent. Well, listeners, stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore some of the counter-arguments and look at the potential of LLMs to, as you said, reimagine the future of software.
You know, one thing that the author does bring up that kind of hints at this other side of the story
Okay.
is the concept of explainable AI.
Oh, yeah, that caught my eye too.
So this is like this idea that we can make these AI systems, more transparent, more understandable.
Right, like lifting the hood a bit so we can actually see what's going on inside.
Exactly. And their argument is if we can trace an LLM's output back to the data and the processes that created it, then we can start to identify biases, address security concerns, and ultimately build trust in these systems.
It's like, I don't know, it makes me think of those how it's made videos.
Oh, yeah.
You see how something is built step by step and you're like, oh, okay, I get it now.
I love those. And yeah, maybe we need something like that for LLMs, like an explainability trail.
Right, exactly. So we can see how they arrive at their conclusion.
Yeah. And there's actually a lot of research happening in this area.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Techniques like attention visualization.
Attention visualization.
Yeah, and it allows us to see which parts of the input data an LLM focuses on.
Oh, wow. So it's not like we're completely in the dark here.
No, definitely not. And to be fair to the author, they acknowledge this progress, but they still have their doubts.
Okay.
They argue that we're still far from truly understanding and controlling these systems.
Okay, I see. But, it brings us back to something we were talking about before.
Yeah.
What if the real issue isn't with the LLMs themselves, but with the problems we're trying to solve with them?
Yeah.
Like the author's so focused on this idea of them as software components, but is that really the right way to think about them?
That's a great point, Their whole argument hinges on this assumption that LLMs should fit into these traditional software development paradigms.
Right.
But what if those paradigms just aren't suited for this kind of technology?
Yeah, it's like, what was the analogy we used before? Trying to use a hammer to screw in a light bulb.
Oh, yeah, perfect. We're using the wrong tool for the job.
Exactly.
And that's why we need to broaden this conversation, figure out what LLMs are truly good at and focus on those problems.
So instead of trying to force them into these pre-existing boxes,
right, exactly.
we need to figure out how they can help us create entirely new boxes, or maybe get rid of boxes altogether.
I like that. Instead of asking, how can we make LLMs fit into our existing software, we should be asking, how can LLMs help us reimagine what software can be?
Okay, now you're talking. This is starting to get really interesting.
It is exciting, isn't it? We're at this really pivotal moment in computing.
Yeah.
And the author's warning about this dead end might be right if we just cling to these old ways of thinking. But if we're open to a paradigm shift, LLMs could lead to some truly groundbreaking stuff.
Okay, so less doom and gloom, more opportunity and possibility.
Exactly. And I think that's a much more productive and, frankly, more exciting way to approach this technology.
I agree. But before we get too carried away, let's bring it back down to earth for a second.
Okay.
Can you give us some concrete examples of how we might leverage LLM strengths in a way that, aligns with what they're actually good at?
Well, think about tasks that involve natural language processing.
Okay.
Writing assistance, language translation, even generating code. These are things that LLMs already excel at, and we're seeing incredible progress in these areas.
So instead of trying to build an LLM-powered self-driving car, which, by the way, sounds terrifying.
Oh, yeah, no thanks.
We should be focusing on LLM-powered tools that can help us, write better, communicate more effectively, even be more creative.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important point. The author seems to be approaching this from a purely technical perspective.
Okay.
But there's this whole human element that's missing from their argument.
You mean like the impact on users and society?
Right. They're so focused on the challenges of integrating LLMs into software systems that they're overlooking the potential benefits for actual people.
Like how LLMs can empower us to do more, be more.
Precisely. And I think that's a crucial oversight. We can't just focus on the technical nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
We have to consider the human impact, both the positive and the negative.
Okay, so it seems like we're starting to see a different picture emerging here.
Yeah.
Instead of viewing LLMs as this threat to traditional software development, maybe we should see them as this catalyst for a new era of human-centered computing.
I like that. It's a vision that's worth striving for.
But it's also a vision that requires, careful consideration, responsible development.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where the author's concerns about transparency, bias, and controllability are really important.
Right. So it's not about dismissing their concerns.
Yeah.
It's about acknowledging them and finding ways to mitigate them while still embracing the immense potential of LLMs.
Exactly. And that's why all this research into explainable AI, bias mitigation, responsible AI practices is so crucial.
Yeah. We're in an uncharted territory here.
We are.
We need to proceed with both caution and a sense of adventure.
Well said.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something the author mentioned that really struck me. This idea that we might need to rethink our entire approach to software development in light of LLMs.
It's a provocative idea, for sure.
What if, instead of trying to fit LLMs into our existing frameworks, we let them guide us towards new paradigms of software creation?
It's like flipping the script, right? Instead of treating LLMs as just another tool, what if we treat them as collaborators in the design process?
Collaborators, that's interesting. Can you unpack that a bit? What might that look like?
Well, imagine software that can adapt and evolve in real time, learning from user interactions, constantly improving.
Okay.
Imagine software that understands natural language commands.
Oh, wow.
Making it more intuitive, more accessible for everyone.
That's a pretty compelling vision.
And as we navigate this new frontier, it's crucial that we remember those lessons from the author's critique. Right. We need to be cautious, prioritize transparency, and make sure that LLM development is guided by ethical principles.
So listeners, as you continue exploring the world of LLMs, keep these insights in mind.
Ask the tough questions.
Demand transparency.
And never lose sight of the human element in all of this.
Because at the end of the day, technology should serve humanity, not the other way around.
Well said.
It really is.
Yeah.
It kind of challenges us to, look beyond just the immediate concerns and think about the bigger picture.
Yeah, the long game. And I think that's what's missing from this article, It's so focused on what could go wrong that it completely misses this incredible potential that LLMs have.
To, fundamentally change things.
Yeah, to reshape how we interact with technology, how we interact with each other even.
It's almost like the author is advocating for this very cautious approach.
Almost defensive,
Yeah. Like trying to contain LLMs, control them. But what if instead of doing that, we embraced what makes them unique? What if we let them lead us to new ways of thinking, new ways of working?
That's a huge shift in perspective, right? Instead of seeing them as a threat, we start seeing them as this, catalyst for a new era.
Yeah, a new era of, human-centered computing.
Exactly, where technology is designed to empower people, not control them.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking that requires a certain level of trust in these systems, right?
For sure.
And that brings us back to all those concerns the author had about transparency, explainability.
Absolutely. We can't just blindly trust any technology, especially something as powerful as LLMs.
So this whole quest for explainable AI, it's not just some, academic exercise.
No, not at all.
It's about ensuring that these systems are aligned with human values.
That they're working for us, not against us.
Right. And I think that's what's so fascinating about this whole conversation. We're not just talking about a new type of software. We're talking about a completely new way of thinking about the relationship between humans and technology.
It's a real paradigm shift. We're moving away from this command and control model,
where we tell the machine exactly what to do.
Right. And instead, we're moving towards a more collaborative, almost symbiotic relationship.
Where we teach them to learn, to adapt, to understand our intentions.
It's less master-servant.
And more like partners.
Exactly. And that has implications for everything. How we design our societies, our economies, even how we live our individual lives.
So, listeners, as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of LLMs, I want to leave you with some questions to ponder. What kind of future do you envision with these systems? How can we ensure that their development benefits all of humanity?
It's up to all of us to shape that future.
So let's have those conversations. Let's push for responsible development, and let's explore the incredible potential of LLMs.
To create a brighter future for everyone.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.